Welcome to Saturday Matters again. This is a really interesting program. I've had a preview of it. Doris was in Berlin as an exchange student, and as you can see from the dates here, a pretty exciting time. We all kind of remember it. And so she has, fortunately, a collection of letters that she wrote back home to her family, and her family saved them, and she saved them, so she has a wonderful account of this. All of you settled down and ready? Let's go, Doris.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for being here today. One of the boxes I brought with me to the University House was labeled Free University of Berlin. I opened it a few months ago and decided to share it with you as a PowerPoint talk because I turned 21 in 1958 while I was at the Free University of Berlin, and I really became an adult that year. 1958 was only 13 years after World War II and 10 years after the Berlin airlift. The Free University of Berlin celebrated its 10th anniversary in 1958 while I was there. The Berlin Wall went up 2.5 years after my return home in January '59, so there was no wall at the time. You could go back and forth between East and West Berlin. So sit back and think about what you were doing in 1958 while I was in West Berlin, deep inside East Germany and only 70 miles from the Polish border. My maiden name was Doris Esch, and I'm a fifth-generation descendant of Christian Esch, who emigrated to Illinois from Alsace-Lorraine in 1837 to join a Mennonite group near Peoria, Illinois. The German language died out in the third generation of my family. My interest in Germany and the German language began toward the end of World War II when I was 8 years old. I started a neighborhood club to send care packages to Germany, and in particular to a pen pal that I had there. Her name was Rosemary Summer. I studied German in high school for 2 years, and I was an exchange student in Essen, Germany in 1954 as a high school student. I took German as a freshman and sophomore at the University of Michigan. In the spring of 1957, I was finishing my sophomore year and planning to major in education in the fall. A friend of mine named Bob saw this notice in the Ann Arbor paper and applied for the scholarship. The exchange rate was 4 marks 20 to $1, so this provided $37.50 a month, which comes out to 150 marks per month for expenses, and they also gave out free tuition. Well, Bob got the scholarship. I didn't apply, and I thought, rats, I probably could have gone. And then a second scholarship was advertised. I applied and I got it. So, this presentation is based on photos and letters to my family. I wrote 24 letters in 16 months while I was there, and it turns out to be about 130 pages of typewritten copy of my letters, which was done by my grandfather's secretary, and it was read by my parents, sisters, and wider family. Oh, in September 1957, my parents drove me from Michigan to New York City, where I set sail on the MS Berlin for the Free University of Berlin. On board, there were 160 Fulbright students bound for a year at German universities, but 23 of them were bound for the Free University. I found them to be talented, friendly, and wonderful young people, interested in making a good impression in Germany. I shared the cabin with two German friends from Detroit. They were returning to celebrate their parents' gold wedding anniversary. And if you go into the hallway on the first floor near the entrance, you'll find a picture that I labeled Oma. She was the bride for this 50th wedding anniversary, and she's holding a pot full of potatoes. She had to actually cook the dinner also. Okay. The city of Berlin is like Seattle in that it includes many former towns and villages, lakes and rivers. But Berlin is 4 times as large as Seattle. When Berlin was divided between the Russian sector and the 3 Western sectors in 1945, the renowned Humboldt University was in East Berlin. Professors at Humboldt had received many Nobel prizes prior to World War II, and I remember going through the halls there and seeing those Nobel Prize plaques on the wall. But Humboldt University was heavily damaged in the war, and they lost many faculty and students. The East German government, which was called the Socialist Unity Party, tried to use the university admission as a reward system for families who supported the government and admitted children of farmers and workers who did not have all the academic credentials. They also put pressure on student leaders who did not agree with the communist propaganda, or agenda, I should say. Some were interrogated, imprisoned, and even executed. By 1947, many students and faculty at Humboldt University were exploring the idea of a new university in West Berlin. The Free University was founded in 1948. So in Dahlem, that was a posh area of single-family homes, there was minimal war damage. And the German government had little money for a new university at that time. They were dealing with real housing crises and everything else after the war. But the Ford Foundation in Detroit came to their aid by building a cafeteria and a lecture hall. On the upper, that's the lecture hall that the Ford Foundation built. And I sat there and listened to the lectures. Okay, so let's see. In 1957, the university was 9 years old at that time. About a third of the students were from East Berlin or East Germany. My classmates at the Free University were about my age. When I turned 21 in 58, they were all 18 to 28 years old at that time. They were born in the 1930s, and they're pretty much like people in this room. We were 5 to 15 years old at the end of World War II, but they were marked by World War II experiences. Okay. About 1,000 students enrolled in the fall of 1957, including about 100 foreign students. German universities, of course, you probably know, are more like graduate schools. We had lectures and seminars, and students moved between the universities in West Germany, and they accumulated certificates for all of the papers that they gave in seminars. But there were no semester exams. Final exam was 4 to 5 years after they started. And of course, I don't know how many of them passed that final exam. But this schedule gave students a lot of freedom to structure their time during the student years. And for example, I took off about 3 weeks to visit Austria right in the middle of the semester because I found a group of teenagers going down there to Salzburg, and I thought I could, and their social worker asked me if I'd like to ride along, so I did, and I visited a couple people, then I went back to the university and continued my education. I lived in a home for foreign students for 3 months. My roommates were from Iran, Denmark, and Denmark. Enjoyed them very much. And they had, the social life revolved around the kitchen. But in January, I moved to a co-op in a street called Parlor Smoke Street. And it did have smoke-filled rooms. And I had a large room and a roommate, but she was seldom there because she was staying with her boyfriend. And I found that cohabitation was quite prevalent there, which was different from U of M at that time. Now, another thing that you encountered when you went to Germany is that people called each other by their last names, like Ms. Grundy, Mr. Feldman, and so forth. Just imagine in our university house if we had to sort of negotiate this, whether we were on a first name basis or last name basis with each person. And then, of course, whether we used the polite form of you or the informal you in German is du. So it took a long time to get really acquainted and to feel really comfortable with all of the students that I had to meet. One of the books written about the student generation there that's been famous and still probably in print is The Skeptical Generation by Helmut Schelsky. I don't know if any of you know that book, but it was published in 1957. And I think it deals with the Germans as a whole, with different social groups. So it's not exactly a portrait of the students, but they exhibit some of the characteristics. They were very serious. They were questioning what makes sense, and they're philosophical. And they were really good at critiquing ideologies. And we had a lot of classes about communism and capitalism and so forth, and they would pull them apart. They have this word Auseinandersetzung, which means tearing things apart, which I thought was kind of fun. It's a really long word. Okay, now this is about the subway system. There was a massive use of subways by workers, students, and refugees in Berlin, and this subway system had been built prior to World War II. Many Germans lived in East Berlin and worked in West Berlin. And so people were going back and forth all the time, and so some daily, but of course the refugees came once with all their belongings and then stayed in West Berlin. They had the fast trains, probably point that out, that were like an octopus going in all directions from the center, which was called Friedrichstrasse. And then they had the ring, which intersected all of the other lines. And I think they were independently administered. In December 1957, I wrote to my family. We visited the refugee camp in West Berlin, where 500 to 700 refugees register every day. Almost all of them find their way to it without any trouble. The director explained to us that these people were not refugees in the usual sense because they are Germans. At the camp, each newcomer is registered and then questioned by a board to determine whether it was necessary for them to leave East Germany. In most cases, refugees are recognized and sent to Western Germany with working permits. My friend and I are inviting 6 refugees to the student center for coffee. This means about 8 hours of work for us, but who can know what it means to them? So I majored in sociology, and this is a picture of Renata Meintz, who is my professor of sociology, young woman. And on the first day of class, she gave us a list of books and asked who would like to review each one or write a report on it. And one of them was Middletown by Robert and Helen Lind, published in 1937, and it's about Muncie, Indiana, and child rearing practices. So I volunteered to write that report, and the book was 500 pages long, and I had 2 weeks to prepare this. And one thing about the book that I think they mentioned, a participant observer, and that is where you're, for example, maybe you go into one of these homes as a babysitter or a caretaker, and you just work along with the family, and while you're there, you gather information about how they handle the child and what issues come up and so forth. And I kind of transferred that thought to myself as a student in West Berlin, and I thought, well, here I am as a participant observer, being a student, and also just kind of watching and seeing what's going on. So that really is something that I've kept most of my life. So I wrote the report in English, and about ready. It was the night before, and then I realized, or day before, and then I found out I had to give this report in German. I was panicked. But a group of students came to my rescue, and they translated the report and coached me on how to deliver it, and went well, and I got a fully satisfactory grade. So at least that was good for the first shot. By the end of my stay, my reading, writing, and comprehension in German had greatly improved. The last papers I gave were rated good or very good by my professors, and I still have to this day a high level of reading comprehension in German. I was really surprised. I opened a couple of books that were on my shelf, and my goodness, I still can read them. So I was active in the Evangelical Student Fellowship, or in West Berlin. And evangelical means Protestant, and actually there's no separation between church and state in Germany, and Berlin was in an area which is the majority of people are Protestant. This evangelical fellowship was supported by the German Protestant Church, or the Lutheran Church. They had social events and music. I brought my violin along, and I played in an ensemble, and I was in a choir. We toured Holland with a cantata by Bach called Wacht auf, or Sleeper's Wake. Maybe some of you know that piece. And also I participated in a Bible study. I moved into this dorm in the spring of 1958. And that was the group that I felt the most comfortable with. And at that point, I decided to stay for another semester because I was just getting acclimated, improving in my German and so forth, and I didn't want to go back to the University of Michigan right at that point. Our student pastor, Dr. Marquardt, had recently received his PhD in theology. He's the man on the left. He was modern and mature in his thinking about the meaning of his Christian faith. He led Bible studies that inspired many students who had gotten away from the church. I remember especially his Bible study on Philippians 2, verse 12 and 13, where Paul wrote, "Work out your salvation in fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you, inspiring both the will and the deed for his own chosen purpose." Dr. Marquardt's passion seemed to be helping German students come to terms with anti-Semitism so that they could move it into the emerging post-war world. Later, he went on to write extensively about the Jewish roots of the New Testament Christians. My first roommates were Hedwig from West Berlin and Uta from East Germany. This is in that student dormitory that I just discussed. Hedwig was studying medicine. Our personalities clicked and we became good friends. Hedwig came from a town called Plön, up north near the West German border with Denmark. She invited me to visit her family for her sister's birthday. We took bikes on the train through the eastern zone and then set out on a bike ride to her home. Yes. In this cartoon, I sketched out the adventures that Hedwig and I had on our bike trip. It wasn't long before one of the bikes broke down and we had to send them both back by train. Then we two girls hitchhiked through Schleswig-Holstein, toured a castle, and got a ride in a car with a toy maker. I dared my father to have it reproduced with my other letters, and he rose to the occasion. Well, Christine Lehman was a second roommate from Dresden, and she was studying sociology. So on the left in this picture, that's me, and on the right is Christine, and we're doing something in the kitchen, making some friends. On November. So one of the big events while I was there is Erica from Winterfeld. She was arrested in East Germany. And so I wrote to my family about this sort of thing, this incident. I said I'm happy with my new roommate, Christine Lehman. She is, this is what I wanted to say. Well, I'm just going to go to the next one here. Erica is a fifth-year student of medicine from Western Germany. She is active in a discussion group with theological students from East Berlin who meet at one another's homes. She often goes to Bible study in the East Berlin Fellowship. She thinks deeply and expresses her opinions strongly, but it would be difficult to get her to do or say something against her will. On Thursday, July 17th, she told one of her classmates who lives in the dorm that she received a telegram from her girlfriend in Halle, which said that her fiancé was ill and perhaps it would be necessary to bring medicine. So Erica rode over on her bicycle to keep an appointment to meet someone at the Press Cafe in East Berlin at 4 o'clock. And since then, there's been no trace of her. Not until Wednesday of the following week did we realize that something was amiss. Erica lives in a private room with a landlady who is seldom home, and she was not expected for sure at any of our meetings. She was released 7 months later, in February 1959, and I got a letter with this news after my return home. So she sat in prison for 7 months, a medical student. And of course, she was one of our favorites. That's Erica. And this guy in the front is Chamberlain. He's another American there that showed a lot of leadership, and I really enjoyed him too. Okay, we'll go to the next. My father used to say, if you can't sing good, sing loud. I told him in the letter in July 13, 58. we had an exchange group of students from Norway that came to visit. It was like a delegation. The Germans had visited Norway the year before, so we're entertaining the Norwegians. The Norwegians could really sing good and loud. One of them played the guitar, and we sang about every American song we could think of. I like the Norwegian songs, so rich and melodious. These students were friendly, genuine, and winning in a way that I haven't seen since I left home. They were so cheerful and uncomplicated that they made the German students wish they could be a little more so. During the second week, we stayed at a lovely guest house run by the church intermission on a peninsula at one of Berlin's lakes. This was formerly the home of a Berlin bank director. Goebbels was his next-door neighbor. Behind the house was a lake where we could swim and go boating. We had discussions and reports for about 6 hours a day, and then we spent the rest of the time enjoying the good old summertime. Okay, this is a sort of a section about the Evangelical Student Fellowship East. In other words, I showed you they had a Western group where I was living, and now they have an Eastern German Evangelical Fellowship East. This was our sister student group. Many students were studying theology, preparing to become pastors in East Germany or East Berlin. They knew that the East German government would carefully monitor their sermons and all aspects of their ministry, once they started working. Many were the sons and daughters of leaders of the Confessing Church, which opposed Hitler during World War II, and Hitler's attempt to start a group called the German Christians. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was their most famous member. He was executed in April 1945 for participating in a plot to assassinate Hitler. He wrote a book about Christian ethics, which influenced later generations. The first time I attended a gathering of the Evangelical Student Fellowship East, I brought along Herta, a friend from the Free University. When we got to the meeting, we sat in the first row next to some students from the East. It turned out that I sat next to Inge Sommerfeld, and introductions and conversations followed. Inge was studying to be a minister in East Germany. Herta, my friend that I brought along with me, had an older brother, Walter Dürr, who lived in Berlin and worked as a typesetter. He was originally from West Germany and was very worried about what was going on in the East. He asked Herta to introduce him to these students whom she was meeting in the East. About 6 months later, Inge and Walter announced their engagement. They got married after I left Berlin, but Inge remained at Humboldt University and applied to move to the West legally. Her petition was long delayed, but 2.5 years after my return to Michigan, she moved legally to West Berlin with her piano. A week later, the wall went up. Inge could have been stuck on the eastern side of the wall. The authorities probably let her move as an easy way to get rid of a minister. Walter owned a small lot in West Berlin near the Tempelhof Airport. There they built a 2-story house where Inge entertained me on visits through the years. They had 2 children. Inge continued to serve in the church in West Berlin. Okay, this is a birthday party that Inge had in her home, and there's all the group of students that are there. Some of them were her high school chums and other friends, and some of the people that I had already met. But we had, really nice conversations about all kinds of things, and and they were asking me about the United States, and the same questions. But I thought that their questions were more naive than what what West Germans were asking. Oh, okay, this picture from the internet shows a typical street parade from East Berlin. The students were required to march in such parades on Saturdays instead of, you didn't have your freedom to say what you wanted to do when the party wanted you to march, you appeared. My letter to the family in June '58 begins, sometimes when I'm with German students, I get the impression that they could just as well be their own parents in the way they act and talk. One example comes from a young teaching assistant at the East Berlin University whose name is Peter. I met Peter at a conference held by the Evangelical Academy on the topic, Our Responsibility in a Divided World. To me, he seems the type of person upon which a whole lot depends. As assistant to a professor of economics who is an avowed communist, Peter must at least go along with this outwardly. One particularly important question for him is this: what are my responsibilities as a citizen of my country, of the eastern part of Germany? There is so much to rebuild. There are young people here to educate. Is it possible or desirable that all young people who are not in complete agreement with the political policies of the government leave? Then in December, early December '58, I wrote, the biggest social event of the past 2 weeks was my Thanksgiving dinner party last Tuesday evening. At least half of my real friends in Berlin were there, and most of those I hope to keep for a long time. The party was held in our room. We fixed it up so that it had a festive appearance. At each place there was a little booklet with colored cover which contained Psalm 100, the words to come ye thankful people come, the traditional Thanksgiving menu, and the guests' names. The conversation was many-sided. One student from East Berlin talked about his trip to Moscow. Another talked about her work with young working girls. Since there were so many theologians in the group, it was inevitable that they should talk shop. We also talked about well-known professors and politicians and church figures and what the Evangelical Student Circle is planning, events in our dorm and reports we are working on. It was very lively. It was a very lively thinking and hungry group, and the evening passed almost too quickly. The students from East Berlin had to leave at 10 o'clock, and others who helped wash up in the two kitchens. These friends are one of the most important things I'm thankful for this year because they have done so much to make my stay here meaningful. Now, so if I had not gone to the Free University of Berlin in '57, my life would have been very different. I could say that. I returned to Michigan in February '59 to complete my BA, and I decided to major in American Studies. In the fall of '59, at the beginning of my senior year, I met Bruce Borthwick. He's on the left in the picture. He's a graduate student in political science department, majoring in Middle Eastern studies. And I found out after I met him that he had been at the University of Beirut at the same time I was in Berlin, had actually come to Berlin to see some friends and was at the same party that I was at, but we didn't meet at that point. But he had connections to Berlin and Dresden, so he knew these American students in Berlin that I knew. And he had distant relatives, I think probably second or third cousins in Dresden, and that his family had corresponded with over the years. And in the future we were to make visits to both Berlin and Dresden. And so Dresden, the people there were more in tune with the East German government, and so you got a whole different point of view when you talk with them. If I had not gone to Berlin, I would have graduated in the spring of '59 and would not have met Bruce. Christina sent me this 1967 calendar to remember our visit after the wall went up in '61. Bruce and I spent the summer of '72 in Berlin with our two sons, Andy 5 and Philip 2 at that point. We sent Philip to Berlin in 1981 at the age of 12, and he visited both of these friends. The friend on the left is Inga, and on the right is Christina. She's the sociology professor. We returned to Berlin to celebrate the opening of the wall opening in 1991, but I guess it took us a few years to get, I guess we got there that year, I'm not sure, sometime after that. Christina visited me in Albion in 1979, and Inga visited me in Coldwater Lake in 2016, so I got them both to come to visit. I made about half a dozen visits to Berlin in the last 25 years and saw both Inga and Christine. My last visit was in 2019, and this picture was taken then. So Inga is on the left, and Marlies is a German minister from East Germany, and was part of that class, and she's on the right. Actually, Inga is taking care of her. She's got multiple sclerosis or something, and was sort of an invalid staying with Inga at the end of her life. I visited with Inga on Skype for many years. I've not heard from either Inga or Christina since 2022, and I assume that they both passed away. Friends from East Berlin taught me that Christian fellowship is a great gift. We have to trust one another in order to discuss burning questions of the day, to critique issues, to decide how our educations would lead to something that would benefit others. East German students who belong to Christian fellowship circles were likely to be arrested and questioned by Communist Party officials. They regarded this as an opportunity to bear witness to their faith, following the example of the early disciples. When a member of our West Fellowship was arrested, Erica was most comforted by knowing that her friends were with her in spirit, confidently praying for her safe return. With such role models as a young student, I became an active member of churches wherever I had lived. In the late 50s, Germany had just begun recovering from World War II. Just leave that on. The students that I knew at the Free University were part of what was then called the skeptical generation. Many had lost fathers and brothers in the war. Most of their families had lost homes and businesses or jobs. About a third of the students from the Free University of Berlin had come from the East with only what they could carry on their backs or in a satchel. Many were above the usual student age of 18 to 23, trying to make up for lost time. All students were searching for something they could really believe in. They were asking their country, "Quo vadis?" Which way are you going? They complained about materialism in West Germany, about nuclear arms, and they tried their best to aid any Jews who survived the Holocaust. In the longer term, many students supported Israel, restored Jewish cemeteries, and put markers on the homes of former Jewish residents. When I see what is going on in the United States today, I think back on the experiences of my German friends, and I ask the same question of our country, quo vadis? That's it.
My husband and I were in Berlin the day the wall went up, in 1961. And we were driving a little Volkswagen, and we were supposed to go over to East Berlin on a tour kind of thing, because even then. But the wall went up,
But we went anyway. They took us over there, and it was like, oh my God. But we woke up to we were a newsboy shouting out, don't ask me in German, but the wall has gone up, or a wall has gone up, and people got stuck on the far side, and then we were driving out of West Berlin to go somewhere else, and they said, just go, don't stop for anything, just go.
The people you met who were from Dresden, presumably survivors of the horrific firebombing of their city, did they have any animus toward the United States and toward you?
No, Christina was my roommate, and she was from Dresden, and we talked. Finally, very late in our friendship, I asked her about that. She talked about the night of the thing. She was, like 5 years old at the time. She said, for her, she was out of the city, and it wasn't as devastating. And this other family had been friends with Bruce's parents for many years, and even before the war, and so I didn't really experience that anger, but I did once in a while. You'd feel when you got close to a few of these people, they would talk about the war or some other issues that had come up, and you always felt like could you really get close to them. Because there's this experience that I didn't share, and that they would remember some soldier or something that happened to their family, and so it was always there in the background.
When I was 9 years old, I went to Berlin with my parents and another family, and we crossed over to the east side, and I was stunned at the way the buildings were still bombed out, and how you could see where people had lived and where their bathrooms were all torn out, and there were you could see the showers there, and the other results of the bombing, and it really stayed with me. It impressed me. And to this day, I remember that part of Berlin.
I've been out birding with a group, including a lady that grew up in Germany. And we were in Kharkiv and went up to the orchard there, and she said, oh, we had an apple tree that survived the bombing.
I've never been to Germany myself, but in Eugene, Oregon in the late 60s, my ex-husband and I lived in one of those big student houses, and one of the residents there was named Jürgen, and I can't remember his last name, who had grown up, had been a young boy, a schoolboy, about 5 or 6, at the end of the war. He was very pro-American, and the reason was that the Americans were feeding children in school. And part of the tricks that the kids learned was if you wanted to have all of the raisins that floated in the cereal that they fed them for breakfast, you tried to get yourself up to the front of the line. But if it was split pea soup, most of the ham and the thick peas would go down into the bottom, so you wanted to get in the back of the line. They had their own places they wanted to get in the line, depending on what was served.
As long as we're sharing our Berlin stories, when I was just out of college in '64, a friend and I went to Europe, and one of the things we did was go to Germany and Berlin. And and we drove. We had a little deux chevaux, which is a small French car that looks like a tuna can. And the thing I remember, following Stephanie's point, is Berlin was so much fun. I mean, we partied, we drank, we met boys. It was just the coolest town. And then we went to, you had to go to East Berlin, you had to go on a bus through Checkpoint Charlie. And when you go through Checkpoint Charlie, they take your ID, they take your passport, everything. And that was a little bit nerve-wracking. Then when we got to East Berlin, it was like another country. There was still some bomb stuff, but not so much. But all the buildings were Soviet style, just cement blocks, no character, no, personality. And another thing they told us was that some of the storefronts that we saw with products in the windows, that there was actually no store behind it, that it was a tourist thing. Very interesting, and anyway.
Storefront with no store?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Any boys in Eastward, did you?
Didn't get off the bus.
Good idea.
We had very close friends in Darmstadt and visited them a number of times. And they were very concerned at the reunification, at what the cost would be to the western part of the country in renovating what had happened in the East. We shared your experience of seeing the kind of fake buildings with people standing on these steps that ran up to a giant mural, and big pictures were being taken in front of them as if it was a real building.
Kind of like the American Wild West on the false front. Anyone else have a comment or a question? Doris, thank you so much for sharing that.